Welcome to the Future of Resolution, Miles Mediation and Arbitration's podcast. We're excited about this season and all of the incredible guests who will share their insights about alternative dispute resolution, legal trends, and so much more. On today's episode, we have Linda Klein. Linda is a managing partner at Baker, Donaldson, Bierman, Caldwell, and Berkowitz here in Atlanta. Linda, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, it's always a pleasure. Thank you.
I've certainly done my research, and I know you, but for our audience, tell me about yourself. How long have you been practicing law, and why did you decide to become a lawyer?
Why I decided to become a lawyer is a story that takes us back to when I was about 6 years old. And my grandpa Harry told me the story that probably inspired me to become a lawyer. Maybe I didn't realize it then, because maybe at the time I didn't want to ever be a ballerina, but I wasn't sure I wanted to be a lawyer. But as I think back on it, it was Grandpa Harry's story. He said to me, Linda Ann, my mother still calls me Linda Ann. He said, Linda Ann, your grandmother and I were married in 1929, and I opened my grocery store. Times were tough. People were starving. And Grandpa Harry told me that every day there were volunteer ladies who would come to his store and they would dole out the welfare money to the people who couldn't afford their food. And these ladies dictated what the poor families were going to eat that week. And Grandpa Harry said that if Mrs. O'Shaughnessy's family preferred potatoes, but those ladies said that they had to eat spaghetti that week, then that's what he had to give to the families. But then he said, sometimes after the ladies left, I exchanged the food. He said it was humiliating. You know what food is best for your family, and no one should be treated that way. That's what he taught me that day. Because my Grandpa Harry was very offended, because his customers, they were his friends, and they were being robbed of their dignity. The emotion that he showed in that certainly stayed with me all throughout my life and stays with me even today. But I recall that there was a twinkle in his eye when he said that I should become a lawyer so that I could be sure that people were treated right, because that's what lawyers do. They stick up for people. So that's perhaps a long story to tell you probably why I became a lawyer.
That's a fascinating one, and it's interesting. He would be proud because you have certainly helped many people and you are very passionate about the profession of law, and that shows.
You know, my Grandpa Harry lived to see me graduate from law school, and he lived to be 94 years old. And so he did see me graduate from law school and begin my career. In fact, he came to visit in Atlanta, and I was already in my second law office. So he did get to see me be a lawyer.
That's amazing. In terms of the span of your career, have there been any defining moments that you can share?
I think there have been several. The one that stands out most right now, and I'm sure I'll think of others as we talk, was my very first pro bono case. And that was about 3 weeks after I began practicing law. And I met a widow who had Alzheimer's. Her family came to see me, and her husband had died. And she needed to get the proceeds of his life insurance policy. The children couldn't find their parents' marriage license. And it's a very long story, but after a lot of work, we were able to get her the benefits of her life insurance. And the check that she got made all the difference in how she would live for the rest of her life. Because she was so impaired, she would never know what I did for her, but I will never forget what she did for me. And that really is what started a career in access to justice and all that it meant. I guess I want to tell you about one more thing that's similar, perhaps, because we just talked about my grandfather. And I think that I took my grandfather's lessons with me when I ran for state bar secretary, and that's, I guess, 24 years ago now. And I put 6,700 miles on my Oldsmobile, and I drove through cities and towns and on county roads all over Georgia. And when I was elected, most of Georgia's county newspapers ran the story of the first woman elected to statewide bar office. And those stories had an effect that I certainly didn't anticipate, and I don't think anyone anticipated. I started receiving phone calls, and they were cries for help. They were from poor, desperate women who were victims of domestic violence. And their stories would make you cry. They had children and nowhere to go. And at the time, legal aid had funding cuts and there was no one to help. And they thought no one saw them. They felt invisible. And I had to do something to fix this, but I was just one lawyer and I'd never handled a domestic relations case. And there was no way that I alone could make a difference. But together, lawyers could be of help. And I called on many lawyers and local and minority bar associations, and everybody pitched in willingly. We created a grassroots coalition with 66 community organizations. We commissioned a poll and met with editorial boards. We created, I called it a symphony, to get women access to justice so that they could have their dignity. We went to the legislature for funding, and we were told we would be lucky to get $500,000, but we were hoping for $1 million. We didn't get $1 million. We got $2 million. And with $2 million, we helped fund legal services to help thousands of families just the first year. And we came together, and I called it the symphony. It was the symphony of lawyers and community organizations. And it was this really powerful song. I don't want to take this analogy too far, because it lifted up thousands of lives. And you know, that appropriation still exists today. Think about how many people have been saved. I guess in my day job, while I'm thinking about it, I try to help people avoid business and family inheritance disputes. And this could involve counseling about the beginning of business relationships, or when there's already a problem, trying to get the problem solved quickly and cost effectively. And if needed, I try to resolve problems in court, but effective arbitration and mediation is probably the best way to get disputes solved for a variety of reasons. I help clients with risk management and crisis management in their businesses become a career-long fan of alternative dispute resolution.
Well, you know, that's music to my ears, so I like to hear that. We are certainly in the business of resolving disputes as well, and I share the same sentiments. I want to talk about your tenure as ABA president, because the American Bar Association is the largest voluntary professional association in the world, operating in 60 countries with 900 employees and a budget in excess of $200 million. It's a huge operation. You were, not too long ago, the president of ABA, so how would you describe your tenure as president of the ABA?
Describing my tenure, that's interesting, because I was ABA president when there was a presidential election, and things changed a lot in the world of the rule of law and access to justice. We can talk a lot about that if you'd like. But the theme in my bar service has been access to justice in all its forms and helping legal services. And at the time, while I was ABA president, the President of the United States suggested a budget that would absolutely zero out all funding for the Legal Services Corporation. And within 3 hours, we got mobilized, and we put up a site that I believe is still there, defendlegalaid.org. And we had over 20,000 people very quickly sign up to be a justice defender. They'd fill in their information, and then little cards that look like baseball cards, and people could upload their own picture, would be sent to their senators and their representative in the House. And we delivered over 20,000 of those on one day in April of 2017. And this way, members of Congress saw their own constituents say in their own words why it was important to them to fund legal services. And as you know, the legal services appropriation not only was kept, but it was increased slightly. So we were very, very pleased. That's just one aspect of things that we did while I was ABA president. One of my causes was helping get veterans access to justice, because there are 22 million veterans in the United States, and they face a maze of legal problems: employment and family matters, evictions, wrongful denial of benefits, involvement, sadly, in the criminal justice system, and even more sadly, homelessness. At least half of the top problems that lead to homelessness among veterans are legal problems. They need a lawyer to solve them. I heard the story of a woman veteran in Savannah who needed a court order to protect her and her 8 children from an abusive partner. That partner sent more than 1,000 harassing text messages and called her workplace and threatened her children. And thanks to a volunteer lawyer, that woman got a temporary protective order and custody of her children. So we did some really fabulous things to help veterans get access to justice. We helped increase the number of medical legal partnerships at the VA, where we would bring a lawyer in to help solve problems, because not all the problems that lead to a veteran to come to the VA for medical help are really medical in origin. There was a veteran who was coming as the weather got colder and colder to the emergency room more often, and a lawyer joined the team and found out that there was a broken window and the landlord wasn't fixing it. And once that window was fixed, then sure enough, the veteran's problems with breathing had resolved. We're promoting veterans treatment courts, where these are criminal courts that are designed to help defendants who are veterans. I visited the Veterans Treatment Court here in Cobb County, Georgia. And before the court, the judge, the prosecutor, the treatment people meet and go over every defendant's file. And they talk about whether progress has been made or not. And they talk about how to keep the veteran in treatment. And we've got more than 41 states that have veterans treatment courts.
I'm wondering, what your thoughts are in terms of you are very active in mentoring the associates at your firm. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on providing access for minorities and also for lower income students who would like to pursue a career in law.
One of the things I'm very proud of at the ABA is we've got a pipeline program. And several bar associations, the Atlanta Bar Association has a pipeline program as well. It's very important for all lawyers, whether they're whatever their practice area might be, to find the time to meet with young people who are in all kinds of socioeconomic situations, but definitely a diverse group of young people, to get them interested in law careers. I remember going to see third graders while I was state bar president over 20 years ago, and I talked to them about being a lawyer, and I remember how sad I was because they knew so much about the criminal justice system, that there were people in their families that had been touched by the criminal justice system. And we're going to need a more diverse group of future lawyers to help fix the problems. We don't want a school to prison pipeline. We want a school to law school pipeline. And unfortunately, the legal profession is the whitest profession in the United States, and that's something we must fix.
You've broken a lot of barriers throughout your career. First female president of the Georgia Bar Association. At the start of your career, you were really the only female lawyer?
Usually
yes.
in the law firm, yes.
Right,
I was.
Okay. So what differences do you see in today's legal market versus when you started your career?
It's a very different world. And I remember being a young lawyer. I became a member of the bar at a very young age. And I remember how the more senior lawyers said how different things were. And I feel it in my own career. Technology has truly transformed the profession. It's allowed lawyers to use their brains on more higher functions. I remember how we would drag out shepherds to make sure a case was still good, and you'd have to look through maybe 10 books to make sure that the case was still good law. Now the more mundane work is done by machines. So technology began when I was state bar president as a great equalizer between large and small firms. And I remember writing a president's column encouraging lawyers in small firms to embrace technology because it was such a great equalizer. But now, because of cybersecurity concerns and abundance of software products that are on the market, both of those things make it very difficult for small firms to compete again. It's difficult to choose the right software. It's difficult to know that your cybersecurity is up to date. And I believe that's going to work out soon. One of the things that we started while I was ABA president was something called ABA Blueprint, and you can find it at abablueprint.com. And that came out of listening tours that I did where I went all over the country to small towns, Fargo, Mason City, Carbondale, Illinois, Owensboro, Kentucky. And I asked lawyers in small groups in these smaller towns, the people I call the foot soldiers of access to justice, the people that help real Americans, middle class people and otherwise, with their legal problems. And what I learned was that these lawyers had trouble learning how to market, picking the software that would help them with their cases. And that's where the idea of ABA Blueprint came from, that it would be a one-stop shop for lawyers in smaller firms to get insurance, to pick software, to get marketing help. That was born in it. That project continues.
An amazing resource. I remember reading about that, and I certainly, for the solo practitioners, I know that those types of resources are enormously helpful, especially when they don't have administrative staff to help.
I remember in Fargo, North Dakota, in the first stop, a lawyer said that she was a solo practitioner and she had the best legal assistant she ever had in her career. And one day the woman came in and said, "I quit." And the lawyer said, "What do you mean? We're friends. We're at each other's house at Christmas. How could you leave?" She said, "Well, I'm going to work as a greeter at the car dealer." "What do you mean, greeter at the car? That's boring." She said, "They have health insurance." And that really stopped me in my tracks. And one of the major motivations for putting insurance into ABA Blueprint.
That's amazing and necessary. Let's shift and talk about attorney wellness, because I've noticed this is a common theme. There was a headline not too long ago about a major big law partner that had to step away because of exhaustion. And I know that for the Georgia bar specifically, there is a concerted effort to create a platform and programs for attorneys who need help, whether it's just to talk about the level of stress that they're experiencing or other issues. I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
When I was in state bar leadership, we had the Lawyers Assistance Program. And over the years, we've seen suicide rates climb and alcoholism and depression climb. And so has the ABA. We worked on this while I was ABA president because the suicide, the alcoholism, the depression rates were of great concern to me and so many other lawyers. And it's another way that a bar association, be it the State Bar of Georgia or the ABA, serves our colleagues is by helping us watch over each other, especially when it comes to substance abuse and mental illness. For more than 25 years, the ABA helped develop and improve lawyer assistance programs throughout the country. In 2016, the ABA released a landmark study that helped everyone, bar associations, lawyers, understand just the dimensions of this problem. Then there were 6 entities within the ABA that teamed with 4 national organizations, including the Conference of Chief Justices, which is very important. And they issued a report with more than 40 recommendations to help improve mental health and well-being among all lawyers. And I'm very pleased to say that that report was released. I guess it was on my last day as ABA president.
It's becoming destigmatized. Like, it's okay to seek help if you're an attorney. And it's wonderful that there are so many programs out there for attorneys to get the help that they need.
I certainly hope that people will continue to feel comfortable in this setting because it's so important. And of course, sadly, when lawyers don't seek help, and their relationships with their clients suffer. And when a client suffers, of course, your license to practice law can suffer.
Very true. Which is interesting because I like to say that litigation at its core can be adversarial, and it's stressful.
Well, I guess it's adversarial by definition.
It's true. We like to say as ADR practitioners that ADR is the antidote. It is a way out of the litigation vortex, if you will, to pursue faster and more effective means to dispute resolution. So let's talk about ADR. How has ADR evolved over your career?
It's evolved a lot. Because a good percentage of my practice is construction law, ADR, particularly arbitration, came into my life and my practice very, very early. The construction industry was certainly one of the earliest adapters to arbitration. I personally became an early adapter to mediation. That was new during my career. And other forms of ADR, as people created them. Maybe I came up with a few creative ideas as well. And then I became a neutral as well. And as a neutral, I certainly feel I'm a better advocate for my clients. It's easier for me to see the opposite side and then to try to find win-win solutions whenever possible. So ADR has certainly evolved in the last 3 decades, and it has become more commonplace as courts had funding problems. The judicial branch in Georgia usually gets 1% or less than 1% of every tax dollar, the entire third branch. So there just isn't enough money as the population of the state of Georgia exploded in the last 4 decades that the courts could possibly handle all of this litigation, all of these disputes. So ADR has certainly filled a justice gap in Georgia in so many ways.
Do you see an instance where ADR is sort of the first step in the litigation process? I mean, certainly a lot of matters go pre-suit. Do you see a shift where cases will go through ADR earlier in the process?
Yes. Both lawyers and clients, particularly business clients, recognize and know more about ADR than they used to. They know how expensive litigation can be. Even filing a case can be expensive. So especially if you need an expert witness to begin your case. So lawyers and clients are thinking, if we could solve this problem now, might we be able to come up with a solution perhaps that saves a business relationship short of litigation? And in those cases, it's almost always mediation. And then if at the close of mediation things can't resolve themselves, then maybe arbitration is a better, faster, cheaper kind of solution. I've heard people say that arbitration is more expensive, and as many times as I've heard people complain about that, when I compare it to what it would have been in the courthouse, I can't think of very many cases where arbitration truly was a more expensive alternative. Could we do things better? Always. We can always do things better, and we should always learn from the things that we do. And there are ways to take a big arbitration case and, with the consent of all the parties, control things up front so that we know things won't get out of hand.
Mm-hmm. It's true. I mean, you're echoing what several of our neutrals said in our previous podcast. I mean, we had so much to say that we filled 2 episodes on it, basically debunking this idea that arbitration is basically litigation light. There's tremendous value in the process as long as the parties are aware of how valuable the process can be and they understand the amount of control that they have throughout the entire arbitration.
Absolutely true.
Where do you see ADR 10 years from now? Because where ADR now is certainly not where it was when you were Georgia State Bar President. So what do you see?
No, and not before that either. I think that ADR continues to become and get more and more creative. There's going to be more online ADR, and ADR will probably be the dominant dispute resolution for certainly small disputes, particularly where the parties are of equal negotiating position. Perhaps I sell you a used, overcoat online, and then the overcoat gets there and it's not the same color as in the photo, or maybe there was a tear in it. We certainly aren't going to go to court or an interstate dispute like that. And online dispute resolution is also is something that I think would take care of it. I think there's going to be more computer-assisted early neutral evaluation, and that will become more prevalent. Artificial intelligence, more and more cases can be reviewed quickly using AI, and as AI gets better and better, then I think you're going to see certainly early neutral evaluation become more prevalent. And as people begin to rely on that more, they might be settling their cases more quickly. Now, certainly a computer is not like a jury. A computer is never going to have the thoughts that an arbitrator has, but I don't think that artificial intelligence will make for more perfect dispute resolution, but I think it will become more of a choice. I do want to say that I'm not a fan of ADR in the criminal justice system. I know there have been experiments with that in different places, and maybe there'll be a day where you can convince me otherwise, but I don't know that ADR is appropriate in the criminal justice system. I'm also not a great fan of ADR when things are greatly unequal between the parties. An example would be a domestic violence case. I don't see how you bring the abused partner and the abuser into a room, no matter how many security guards are in the room. That's not a good place for a mediation, for example. So I just wanted to make that comment that while I see ADR growing and growing and growing in civil disputes, particularly the smaller ones, those are two places where I'm not ready to embrace it.
I understand. What are your hopes in the coming years for the profession? What are your hopes and what are your fears?
Well, I am very fearful about the attacks on the rule of law and judicial independence. And lawyers have got to be the people that stand up and protect the rule of law. That is what makes our democracy work. It's what keeps our commerce going. When business knows that there's a way to resolve their disputes and it's final and it's fair, that makes all the difference. So I am very worried about the future of the rule of law. I'm very worried about attacks on the judiciary and judges' independence to make the right decisions. We need to be sure that when there are open judicial positions that they're filled and that everybody maintains confidence in the system. I think back to the violence that came after certain judicial opinions and what that meant, and we hopefully have grown as a country each time that happens. But the public has to have trust and confidence in the system. While I was ABA president, we worked on creating a toolkit for communities to use to heal and to increase public trust in the system. But we certainly don't want to have politicians talk about the rule of law and the judicial system and create a lack of confidence in law enforcement and the judiciary that is not helpful.
But what about your hopes?
I'm hopeful that just as there have been road bumps on the way to diversity and peace in our country, that things will swing back and we will be stronger and better for it. I certainly see that as a possibility, and I'm very hopeful that that's what's going to happen. And we need lawyers to make sure it happens.
Absolutely. But I would love to hear your thoughts on the importance of diversity in ADR. Just I think representation matters. And as you stated earlier, there's a lack of diversity in law in general. But then when you narrow it down to the practice of ADR, it's certainly not where it needs to be. So what are your thoughts on that?
Just like we need to have a bench of judges that is diverse, and what a difference that makes to litigants who come before the court to see someone who looks like them and understands them. We have to have arbitrators that are diverse, because more and more people will be coming to arbitrators and mediators and neutrals to solve their problems. And our nation is much more diverse, certainly than our profession, and certainly than our judiciary, and I think it's even worse in alternative dispute resolution. And the profession needs to continue to work on this. We need to continue to be sure that we have people coming into the profession who are excited about becoming lawyers, that are diverse and reflect our communities much better. That's what's going to keep the rule of law and our democracy and our system of commerce going. And so it's not like icing on the cake. It's quite different. It's like the flour. It's the basics. This is important and it's urgent.
So, Linda, you've been the Georgia Bar President. You have been the American Bar Association President. What's next for you?
I suspect it will find me. Right now, I'm very happy to be back with my clients, doing more internal investigations for clients and others now. So I'm really excited about being back in my practice full time. But something will find me. It always does.
I'm sure you have a penchant for winning prominent races within the legal profession, so I'd like to think that would translate into public office.
Well, I don't think so.
Well, Linda, thank you so much for your time. It's always a pleasure to speak with you, and good luck in all of your future endeavors.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the time. It's been a lot of fun.
You've been listening to The Future of Resolution, the podcast. You can follow The Future of Resolution on Miles Mediation and Arbitration's Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. If you haven't yet, go to Apple Podcast, Stitcher, Spotify, and subscribe, rate, or review this podcast. Join us soon for another interesting discussion. Thank you for listening. For more information about Miles Mediation and Arbitration, visit our website at milesmediation.com.